We're on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, and we're going to begin here on the bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph. Rav Safra Ravok Hadar Bekracha. Rav Safra fit this profile that we described earlier of a single person who lived in a metropolis and overcame all the temptations therein. And when the story happened, the Tani Tanak Hamei de Rava Rav Safra, when one of the Chacham in the presence of Rava and Rav Safra quoted the Brisa that we learned here on Amid Aleph, and now we're on Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, that there are three categories of people that HaKadosh Baruch Hu announces with regard to them in their praises every day, and one of them is a single person who lives in a city and overcomes all the temptations is Sol upon of Rav Safra. Rav Safra thought that he was included in that great description, the praise of Hashem, and therefore he was besimcha. Although Rav says Lav Kagon Mar. It's not like we're describing you, someone in your category. You're sitting the whole day in the Beis Medrash. You don't go around the city. You have no business. And therefore, you don't have all those temptations. You're not overcoming them. Ella, but rather Kagon, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Ochai, an amazing story now the Gemara tells about these two great Amoraim. The Avi Ushpeche, they would fix people's shoes. They were shoemakers, Biarad Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. Avi Yosve V'Kshuka de Zonos. And their location, for some strange reason, was in the marketplace where the Zonos used to do their business. The Avdi Lahu Misane Zonos. And they would create shoes. They would manufacture shoes for the Zonos and sell it to the Zonos, the Ailahu. And very often the Zonos would come into their shop and they would either ask, to purchase, or maybe they wanted to fix the shoes that they already purchased. Inu mistakli bahu. And the Zonos would look at these two great rabbis, the Inu lo madlan einayu listakuli bahu. But Rav Nina and Rav Ochia did not pick up their eyes to look at these Zonos. Umumsayu hachi. And when people used to take an oath, or perhaps when the rabbis took an oath, they used to say, B'chayim d'Rabbanan Kadishi Di'arad Yisrael. In the life of those great holy rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, they referred to Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia. And this is based on a statement of Chazal, Kol Makom Shatamotzi, Erevat Motzi Kedusha, that they were considered sanctified because they had a gather of Ereva. Now, exactly who was taking the Shvuah, so he quotes here a number of different possibilities. It could be the Chachamim. When they took Shvuahs, they would take it in the name of Rabbi Chanina and Rav Oshia. They were called Kedoshim. And the Ben Ichai interprets that it's the Shvuah that Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia themselves took, that even though they were Nitzharim and Gidrei Kedusha, they were very careful, but they didn't consider themselves Re'uyim. They didn't consider themselves worthy of being called and described as Kedoshim, and they were greater Chachamim than them. And therefore, they were Nishboim B'Shmam. Or perhaps he says, Kavanasam, Shebechol Gvuras B'Kedusha, He B'Schus HaChacham HaGdol Sheberet Yisrael. Different interpretations about how they took the Shvu. Shlosha HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oavan. Three categories of individuals are beloved to God. Misha Eino Koes, he doesn't get angry, even for the sake of a Dvar Mitzvah. For example, Rav doesn't get angry on his Talmud for learning Torah. And certainly in Mili Dialma, a person who gets angry is considered as compared to an Oved Avodah Zarah. Umisha Eno Mishtaker, a person who knows how to control his intoxication, he doesn't get drunk. Umisha Eno Mamed Al Midosov, in other words, he doesn't pay back someone, take revenge against someone who did him evil. And on the flip side, Shlosha Kodesh Baruch Hu Sonam, there are three categories of people that Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't tolerate. One is Hamadaber Echad B'Peh, the Echad B'Lev. He thinks in his heart one thing, but he says something else. And Ayodeh Edus B'Chaver Ve'nu Meidlo. He knows testimony that could be meaningful on behalf of his friend, and he refuses to come forward and give the testimony, and he sees some sort of an avera that his friend violated, and he comes to testify. He's not believed on his own. We need two witnesses, but he comes to testify. He's basically a motzi shemra. Ki like the story of the Tuvia Chata. Tuvia did an avera. The Asa Zigud, somebody by the name of Zigud L'chudei, came by himself, Yisai Bey, and he testified in court against Tuvia. Ameder Rav Papa, and Rav Papa was the presiding judge. Nagde, Rav Papa gave him Malchus to Lezigud. Amalei Zigud says to Rav Papa, I don't get it. This is what you call Yashrus. Tuvia Chata, Zigud Mingid. Tuvia was the one who did the Avera. Now you're punishing me. Amalei, Rav Papa said to Zigud, yeah, you deserve to be getting Malchus. Why? The Torah says, Al Yakum Echad Be'ish, that one witness should not testify against against someone. And you came by yourself to testify. All you're doing is you're being motzi shemra, and you violated the law of Rachel, and therefore you get mal. Omar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Rav. Even in the case of someone who sees someone else violate an avera and he's not allowed to come and testify by himself, nevertheless, mutal is no so allowed to hate this person because he himself knows that this guy is a Rosh. Shenemar, as the Torah says, Parshas Mishpatim, it says, Isirecha chamor sonacha roveitz tachas masa. Oh, azov tazovimo. You see that the beast of burden of your friend, not your friend, of your sonah, of somebody that you despise, is collapsing. You have to help him. And what does it mean that the Torah commands you regarding to his sonah? My sonah. I mean, ilema soneh nachri. If you're talking about a case where he hates a non-Jew, v'atanya soneh sha'amru l'soneh Yisrael. We have a brisa that says that if the masa of his friend is reference to a Yisrael, not to a ben nachri. Elapshita l'soneh Yisrael. See, talking about someone that you hate and he's a Jew, is the Torah here describing a case which is prohibited, that you hate another Jew, but rather the Ika Sadi the Ovid Isura. So you're going to tell me that the two witnesses that testified against this person, who Chamar is holding this burden, carrying, and they testified that he violated an Isura. And therefore we have established this objectively that he is a Rocha, and you have to hate him. Is then Kuli Almanami to say Sonile. It says in the pasuk, "Ki tirach chamor son acha." He's your son. If they testified against him and established he's a Rocha, then he's everybody's son. Maishna hai. Lalav ki hai gavna. It must be this situation. He himself saw that this other person violated a law, but he was only a yachid. He saw it by himself. There's no other witness. He cannot testify. The world himself cannot hate him. They don't have any objective evidence against him. But this person saw it. He knows that he's an Avera. Therefore, he is Sonacha. And he's allowed to hate him. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak goes a step further. He says mitzvah is sorrow. You even have a mitzvah you're obligated to hate him. Shenemar, Pasuk Mishlei Yiras Hashem Sonos Ra. Omar Rav Acha Brei Deravler Rav Ashi, in a case of a Talmud who saw someone who violated an Averu, Ma'ul Memrele LeRabbi, he's allowed to snitch, so to speak, tattletale to his Rebbe. Limisne, so that his Rebbe will fulfill this obligation that was formulated by Rav Nachman, that you should hate an Avarian. Amalei, Yada de Behemin LeRabbi Kaveit. Only if your Rebbe will accept your testimony, he relies on you totally, to the extent that he considers you as if you were two witnesses who came into Bezdin, Lemele, then you should tell your Rebbe. V'lo, but if your Rebbe will maybe trust you, but he doesn't consider you like two witnesses, Lemele, don't tell him. Then it becomes Nahar. There are three people whose lives are not considered lives. Torah Shlosha, there are three people who, because of their very nature, something that bothers them, they are trudim kol shah, 24/7. Chayem enim chay. They have no rest in their lives. Number one, it's harachman yosef, someone who has an extreme rachmanus, and therefore he goes to such an extreme yosef midai. That's not good, and he's always going to be worried that he's not doing enough and he's not a rachman enough. Number two, raschanim. These are kaasanim. These are people who get angry, too much anger. That's not a good thing. Vanine adas. These are people who are very sensitive. They're makpid too much on anything that's most. They're almost psychologically diseased. The Omer of Yosef Kulu is now be, and Rav Yosef, in a statement, an expression of humility, said that all these different natures that are mentioned here are with me. In other words, I embody these natures. So the Ben Yoda points out that Shoshet Dvarim Hoyulo Mishum Shayas Suma. Number one, Rav Yosef was blind, and therefore, Omim Adam Akabel Makav Soe. So somebody got hurt, he stubbed his toe or whatever, and he started yelling a little bit, screaming a little bit out of pain. And this Suma, in this case Rav Yosef, thinks it was a terrible, terrible Maka. Who knows, maybe his life is in danger. And he has such extreme Rahman. Whereas a Pikech would realize if he saw that it's not so true. Then Adam She'ena Osa Ritzonu Kois Olo. Somebody who doesn't fulfill his will, he gets very angry because he's a blind person, he's very sensitive. A Pikech would see that the guy didn't violate his will to such an extent. Something dirty on his beged, somebody pointed out. He thinks that it's such a lichluk gadol that he's mitztayer mi'od. He gets into a real hassle about it. There are three people or creatures that hate each other. Klovin, dogs don't appreciate one or the other. Batargolim nor do chickens. These are parsi. Yeshom Rafazonos, and even dodos hate each other in such stiff. When they ask a kasha one against the other, it's out of a sense of almost aggressive anger. And this is based on a Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin that compares Talmidei Chacham in Eretz Yisrael who are mani'imim zedze b'halacha in contrast to those in Bavel that are fighting like a battle, a war. Once again, Torah Rabbanu Shlosha Ovim says, Eluhem HaGerim veHa'avodim veHa'orvim. These three categories of people, of individuals, are called shvelim. They're very humble. And therefore, since they're humble, they love each other. And he adds here, Orvin. Let's see if by chance there's any comment here about Orvim. He says, the individuals of these groups have very little pride in themselves because of their perceived lowly status. They don't worry about they do not worry that their peers might be a threat, competition to their positions. They're easygoing to each other. Okay, so the Gemara is saying something about the nature of Orvim. I mean, that's Hazal had a keen insight into the nature and the psychology of the biological world. Arba einadas sovlos. There are four categories of people that are intolerable. We cannot tolerate them. Number one, dal gea. In other words, he's got nothing to be proud of. He's very conceited. Number two, ashir. He has a lot of money, but makakesh, he denies that he owes money to someone else. And he quotes here the Lachmei Toda, Shemachish Kideli Potem in Atzdaka. It's not that he denies a claim in Bezdin and purges himself, but rather he tells people, you know what, the Baal Bais is not here, so you can't collect stuff. He's the Baal Bais himself. Zaken, Minoif, an older person, he doesn't have taiva, he doesn't have that burning passion, desire, and yet he does things that are immoral. And you have a person who lords it over the community and for no reason at all. And when they are in a terrible situation, he's not there to protect them, to have mercy on them. Even a person who divorced his wife, then he married her again and divorced her a second time, and then again, he's marrying her a third time. We can't tolerate such a thing. More clarifies. Vitanakama, what is it about this issue of someone who remarries his wife a second and a third time? Tanakama didn't have it on his list. So the Gemara says, Zimna, it could be that he has financial pressures, and that's why he remarries her. Tanakama is willing to look the other way. Diksubasa Maruba. He owes her a massive amount of ksuba, so when he remarries her, he doesn't have to pay the ksuba. Maybe he has children from his wife, and it's very hard for him to separate from his children. And therefore, he can't live in that situation of gerushin. And even though perhaps he's still angry at her, nevertheless, he will, with the course of time, the Tanakama believes in faith in him that he'll be able to overcome his anger and have a normal married relationship. Noah gave a curse to Canaan, and as a result, there are 5 different behavior patterns of the Canaanim. And it's as if the Canaan gave that legacy, and he almost mandated his descendants to do these five terrible things. And all this is as a result of the fact that Noah bestowed the curse on Canaan that he should be an Eved, as the pasuk says, "V'yehi Canaan Eved Lama." Number 1, Ehevu Zeh et Zeh, and this is like what we described before, that Avadim don't feel that sense of competition because they have that lowly feeling, and therefore they love each other. They don't feel that hatred, and they don't harbor that sense of competition. We don't understand this Gemara because this is a midah tova, to love one the other. Why is this a tzivui of the Canaanim? So he has a long interpretation here of the Oel Yaakov, Afsha Ganov Shiroas Chaveru Gonev, who Mizgana Olav Sono, B'chashash Knan, Kashayiras Chavreim Gonvim, Tizgana Midazu Beineim Biachdalu Mehem Lachet Tzivam Lehov, says Kula Beitza Achas Lasos Amaisa. In other words, there was a lot of robbery, thievery, and therefore he didn't want them to be angry at each other. He wanted them to join together in one power, and therefore he told them, please love each other. He says the following. The following traits are common amongst the descendants of Canaan. It's as if he instructed his offsprings to act in this way. Now, according to the interpretation of the Ben Ish Chai, apparently, Havu Zed Zeh is a matter of indulging in their lust. Now, when whatever a slave acquires becomes the property of his master, how then could he have the means to hire harlots? Because it says, Evras HaGezel loved theft, the Evras HaZima loved depravity, but they were slaves. Canaan therefore instructed them to love theft. They should steal things. However, if discord exists amongst the Canaanite descendants, they will inform on each other, and their thieving will be curtailed. He therefore instructed them to love one another so they might conspire together. Now, if a slave feels any positive sentiments towards his master, he will not be willing to forsake a task in the middle lest his master thereby incur a loss. Such sentiments would discourage the slave from following after a harlot who happened by as he was involved in his work. Canaan therefore instructed his children, hate your masters. And finally, right, that's the next category here, sinuas adonecha. Find out to dabru emes, if the slave is not accustomed to lying and his master demands to know why he left the work half finished, he will not be able to make up a credible excuse on the spot. Canaan therefore told them, do not speak the truth. Get used to fabricating clever lies at all times. In this way, the descendants would be able to engage in licentiousness so beloved by Canaan. Shisha dvarim ne'marim bisus. There's 6 things that you could say about a horse. And that means that if a person purchases a horse from his friend and he says, I'm putting my money down, I want to guarantee you that this horse has no blemishes. And then he finds out that there are blemishes. He should be forewarned, and therefore he cannot claim mekachos. Oives haznus, like the susim are very promiscuous. Oives hamelchama, and they're very attacked. Berucho gasa, even if you beautify a horse, and you're doing it because the rider should look so impressive, but they take it as if they're beautiful. Moises hashina, they don't sleep much. Ochel harba, they eat a lot. Umotzi kima, and I guess their excrements are limited. That they're not loyal to their master during wartime. He says here, Madua manu mida zupen midos haros hasud. Why does he have that they don't sleep that much? Why is that a bad trait of a horse? And actually, we find in Tanakh that David HaMelech was praised because he didn't sleep much. As far as tzaddikim is concerned, if they don't want sleep, that's great. Sus who loves to go out and battle is shenasim tovalahem uliolam. It's good if they sleep. And unfortunately, they refuse to sleep. So they want to be in that mode of going out to battle. He quotes here, Yushalmi besus Zachar, if the sus is a male, horeg bailov b'milchama. He actually is responsible for the death of his rider. And Yesham, some say because Sharot Zachar Nekevos, he's so interested in snus that he inadvertently causes the death of his rider in battle. Shiva menudim lashamayim. There are 7 categories of individuals who, at least up in Shamayim, they're in a state of nidui, kind of excommunication. The first is Yehudi. Now, the Yavit says it should say me because of censorship. They added the word Yehudi. Really, they meant me, and they were referring to the Komrei Romi that sit in the Vatican, and they don't get married. That's the priests. So that's number 1, Misha Einlo Isha. And we're reading it with the word me, like the Yavits would read it. Now, the Stei Yitzchak points out that he doesn't get married because he doesn't want to get married. If something is preventing him from getting married, then he's parted from Nidu. And there were many Amoraim that did, in fact, remain single. In any event, Ein Lo Isha is not involved in bringing children into this world. Period. Number 2, Yesh Lo Isha Ein Lo Banim. He sets it up in such a way that his wife should not have children. He doesn't want to be Mekayim the mitzvah, period, even though he's married. Number 3, Torah. He has children, but he doesn't raise them for the study of Torah. And number 4, Misha Ein Lo Tefillin Barosho, Utfil Bezro. He owns a pair of tefillin, but he doesn't wear them. Or tzitzis bebigdo. Number 5, he has a beged with 4 corners, and he doesn't put tzitzis on them. Im Elo Beged Shal Arba Kanfos, an owner beggar that has four corners, yesh lo liknos, he should go out and buy one. K'dei la'achnes es atzmo b'chiyuv mitzvahs tzitzis. In the case of tefillin, he's obligated a chovas haguf, so for sure he has to buy tefillin. It's not an issue, but in tzitzis, the chiddush here is that he should go out and buy himself a beggar of four knafos in order to incur the chiyuv of tzitzis. Umezuzah v'pischa. He has a Pesach that's chayiv mezuzah. He refuses to put a mezuzah there. He's chayiv nidui lashamayim. He's really mamayit kvod shamayim. And hamonea min olam miraglav. He doesn't wear shoes, so he also is mamayit kvod shamayim because God created all tzarkei adam lo chiser b'olam klum. And he doesn't want to wear shoes and thank Hashem and appreciate God's gift. And others say that he's menuda lashamayim because a menuda is not allowed to wear shoes. Yesh omer af mi she'en mesiv bechabur shel mitzvah. When it comes to a bris milah or a sudas kohen that gets married to a bas kohen, a wedding, he doesn't want to sit around and waste his time and be part of a chabur shel mitzvah. He's aloof. Omer Rabba Baruch Hanan Rab Shmuel Bar Mata Omer Rav Mishum Rab Yossi Shutza. 3 halachas. Number 1, Minayin Shein Sholim Bekaldim. These are the astrologers. They look at the stars and they tell you the future. We're not allowed to go to them. Shenemar, the Torah says, Tomim Tiyam Hashem Lokecha. You should believe and rely on Hashem that everything that has to happen is going to happen. And don't go into these chakiros, what's going to happen in the future, and check out the astrology. Uminayin number 2, Hayodeh b'chaver shu gadol afilu b'davar echad chayav linog bo kavod. Even if he didn't learn anything from him, and if he learned something from him, then the Gemara establishes that David learned something from Achitophel, and he called him his Rebbe, he gave him cover. But here we're talking about a case where he didn't learn anything from him, but he knows he's greater in one particular area, and therefore he has to have cover for him. Shenemar, we derive this from Daniel. Daniel was amongst the officers in the court of Darius. And Omar Amel, the king said, Kol kavel di ruach yatiru be. Since he had chachma, Daniel, therefore we should have respect for him. Umalka ashis lehakmuse al kol malchusa. The king thought in his heart to appoint him as the moshel on all of his kingdom. And that's the cover that he wanted to be knowing in Daniel because of Daniel's great wisdom. Hayosheves al dam toha. So a woman who gave birth and she has dam toar in the case of a male child for 40 days, or in the case of a female child for 80 days. So in the case of a male child, she's tmeah for a week, and then the balance up to 40 days, she's already dam is tar. In the case of a female, 14 days of tumah, and then tara for the balance until day 80. Asura l'shamish. On the night after she leaves the 40 or the 80, meaning in the first night of tara, he should not have relations with her. Again, we don't know it's the night. We're going to find that out in just a second. But he should be choshesh. Maybe, you know what? She's seen re'ios, which were tar, and now any re'ios she sees is tame because she passed the 40 or the 80 days. Be worried that she's going to continue to see dam, and that dam would be dam tame. How long does he have to wait until he could have relations with her? When he reached the 40-day or the 80-day period, Amarav Ona, he should only wait that night. So the night of 40 going into 41, he should abstain, and so too for 80 in the case of a girl. Ona, we learned in a brisa, who Yosef ish Hutzal, this person who was mentioned here that quoted 3 halachos, is called in the Gemara Yosef ish Hutzal, but he had other names. Who he's also called elsewhere Yosef Abavli, who Isi ben Gur Aryeh, who Isi ben Yehuda, who Isi ben Gamliel, who Isi ben Malal, who Mashmo, Isi ben Akav Yishma. In other words, here's a case of a chacham that had many, many different names. And the reason why he had so many different names is Mipnei Gzeres Hashmad, because the Goyim were threatening him in the period of Shmad, and therefore Meshanesh name Aviyim, he would change his father's name, and he would flee from one place to the other so people wouldn't recognize him. That was during the period of Shmad. The Marsha adds, that the various names represented the great aspects of his father. Find something similar, the Gemara says, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Tavla, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Hakla, or Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Ilah. Many different names, and his father's name changes because of one of those two reasons that we expected. And we find this, and here we turn to Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha Deshmaita. In other words, when you see the name Rabbi Yitzchak Stam, and they bring down a loch in his name, it's a reference to Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha, but who he's also by another name known as Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas the Agadativ. So in Agadativ, if you see Stam, Rabbi Yitzchak, then the kavan is to Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. If you want a memory device to remember this, is Vish Shma'uni Achi Ve'ami. Passing in Divrei Yomim, Sham'uni Achi is, we mentioned Shmaitito, that's Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha, and therefore the Agados are Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. So here's we're going to stop on the top of Kuf Yud Daled Aleph, Omar Rabba Bar Chan. That'll be here on the third line down from the top of Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph.